Hey, everybody. Oh, there's Nia. I'll let him in. And Tiff. I guess I could have waited a moment or two before getting started. Uh, all right. So, almost finished with week 6 now. The semester is quickly drawing to a close. 2 more weeks after this. The progress reports from the projects from last week all seem, most of them seem to be coming along pretty well. I saw a couple comments where people were saying it seems like not much is getting done or whatever. But remember, programming is a thinking thing. And I could tell from the write-ups and diagrams that were there that you've done the thinking part, and the typing's easy, especially if we've already thought it through and know what needs to be typed. That part comes together very quickly. So there is still a lot of progress, even though sometimes, I know if we haven't sat down and actually created the files and started typing code into them, it seems like there's not much being done, but the thinking is getting done. And the thinking is the hardest part. That's why it's a well-paying job, right? It's not a well-paying job because it's really hard to type on a keyboard. It's because of the thinking, and I can tell that part is moving along smoothly, even if it feels like not a whole lot of code has been actually typed up yet. But everything was looking good there. I've still got a couple weeks to go on it, and I made sure our workload is pretty light on week 7 and week 8 to finish up those projects. And the stuff we're getting ready to look at today is not really a whole lot to it, so it shouldn't take very long to work it into the next version on the programming assignments, weekly assignments. It'll actually probably take about the most of the time will be spent creating the form for logging in back to the HTML stuff, and then the code for once we log in goes quickly. But I guess we can go ahead and get started into the new content. Does anybody have any questions before we get started?
I'll get my question after we're done with class, because I had one I had for you, but it'll wait.
Okay, lab time. Yeah, we can look at it there. So yeah. We'll go ahead and jump into the next bit of next little concept. So thus far, all our stuff's been moving along pretty good. We're able to run the scripts, and we can get things from like HTML forms over to the PHP script with post arrays, or the other day we saw using Ajax to do so. So we have several ways to get data to our script. And well, as we navigate around the site, though, we have to keep redoing that, right? The other day when we first started integrating the MySQL stuff, we needed an email field to identify our user. Well, we could have used a name or an account number. We needed some way to identify the user. We went with an email for our example, but we had to add that in to several different pages. And on each page of our site, we had to have the user re-enter their email. It'd be nice if they only entered that once, which is the main topic for today. But leading into it, even before actually logging into the site, just being able to get data from one page to another while we're on the site. Right? If somebody navigates to our website, any data they give us should still be there on any page of our site, basically. And we do that with session data, sessions, and our book also covered it, so I'm also going to briefly mention cookies. So sessions and cookies, typically cookies would be handled client side, but we can do it from the server side as well. So might as well mention it. And I remember when I first saw the textbook we're using here, I was a little bit curious as to how they got an entire chapter out of session and cookies. But they did. It was a very short chapter, you probably noticed. So, and even that short of a chapter, it was more than I was expecting an author to be able to put together when I first saw it in the table of contents for the book. I was like, wow, that's it's not much to fill up an entire chapter with, but the idea of a session is very straightforward. It's a persistent connection between our pages, so that once a user goes to our site, they're on the site, and any data that we have persists the whole time they're on the site, not just that page. We can make the data persist the entire time that the user goes back and forth between, like, the home page and the order page and the post reviews page and the receipt page there on our example site, and keep the same data around the whole time. Cookies do a similar thing. The big difference is the session storage happens on the server, and the cookie storage happens on the client. That's why it's usually handled in JavaScript, but we have access to it. Let's see. And really the cookies for the next note is cookies allow us to do things like automatically log into sites we've logged into before. So we don't have to re-enter the username and password on our own computers. I think everybody's familiar with that, right? Ivy Learn does that nowadays. You should, I know at least my account's been doing that. I stopped having to log into Ivy Learn every time on my computer, and I only have to log in when I go to it from another device. Like I bought another computer the other day, and that first time I went to Ivy Learn, I had to log in again, but I haven't had to log in on the new computer since then. Yeah, and setting up cookie data is fairly trivial. We'll see that very quickly. There's nothing very complicated about it. And same thing with the session data. So somewhere on our PHP script, probably by the time we finish the examples and everything today, that at the end of the login script, after the user has entered their name and password and everything's been confirmed that they do have access to the site and all that, then we'll just start a session. So we put the words session underscore start. It's just a function we put on the first line. On first line. Or every PHP script we want to have access to the session data. Well, I guess technically the second line, because we have that opening PHP tag. I always come down the next line. So I guess we could put it on that line. It wouldn't hurt anything, but the very first line inside our PHP tag, we just put that word on everything we want to be connected. Anytime we want to be able to access the same data. For example, once a user logs in, if we want to use their name on any page, other pages in our site, we just put that at the beginning of the PHP script, and it ties everything together. And at that point, we have an array called session, where we can store an associative array called session, in all uppercase letters, that normal thing like we're seeing with the built-in arrays. And we can store any value we want to keep around for the entire session in that variable, or at that index in the array. Yeah, and then anytime we're in the session, we can just access right from that array or put them into more useful variable names, something that matches the way we normally type stuff. If you do it, you regularly use camel case or something that matches your stuff, or maybe not a variable instead of an array. But that should be fairly straightforward. And then when finished, we put session destroy. And that just clears all the session data out. Basically, it just removes that array from memory, and we have to start a new session if we need to use it again after that. And this one does not have to go at the beginning of the first line. We want to make sure this is first every time. That way, anything else we do has access to that session data if we need it. But the session destroy is just whenever we're finished. So we'll see that in our example here before too long, because there's not very many lecture notes today. But on our login script, at the very top, we're going to put session start, expecting the right username and a valid username and password to come through. But if they give us like the wrong password and we're not going to let them into the site, then the if else block that checks that would call session destroy in the middle of the script, so that we don't inadvertently keep the wrong data around. And basically relog in, get ready for the next login and do the session start on a good login instead of a bad one. So this one can go just whenever we're finished with all the data. It doesn't have to go at the top. Typically like a logout script, that's about the only thing I put on logout scripts is session destroy, and then a header function to go to the index page or a departing message page or something like that. Just clear out all that data. And that's it. So just call the session start on the first line of every script that's going to be used. Every script you want to keep the data around for. Load any data you want to keep into this array and then access it from this array. And call session destroy when you're finished. That's pretty much it for sessions. That's why I was kind of surprised the book was able to get an entire chapter out of that. Like, wow, surely they could have just put a paragraph somewhere else. But a related note is cookies. And so I guess I can split up my little labels here. This half of the board sessions, this half of the board be cookies. Yeah, might as well put the definition one more time. A session is just persistent data across our scripts. So persistent data across our scripts, so on the server. A client is a cookie is a string stored on a client. Sorry, I said that all jumbled up those words really bad. Let me try that sentence again. A cookie is just a string stored on a client. Another way to keep our data persist, and since we're actually storing a string on the client computer, it'll be there the next time that user comes back to our site, because the data we might need is stored on their computer. Usually it's handled client side, but we can do it from the server side. We call this function set cookie. And then we need two things. We have to give it a name. I didn't mean to put a quote mark there. I was going to put that like a variable. We give it a name and then the value we want to store. And again, that value will always be a string because the cookie is just a string. Then at some point later, maybe the same, maybe on the next page, maybe 3 weeks from now, when that user comes back to our website, we can access that from an array. And at this point, you can probably guess what the cookie array looks like. We've seen quite a few of them, right? Array called cookie, and then just whatever name we passed in. I'm going to write index for the generic one here on the board, but that index will be the name we called the cookie. So that and that match. Yeah, I put it in a variable for the generic form. That's just a string. So whatever, maybe I could put it like that so it would match. Instead of a variable, I'll put a string called index. Oops. And then that's the index we access from the array. And on this one, it's really important to remember to use the is set. So remember is set. Whenever we go to access that data, because it's stored on the client, which means the end user has control over it, not us. So if somebody cleared their cookies, went into the browser history and cleared out the history and all the cookies and everything, any data we stored on their machine is going to be gone. And we usually also put in expiration dates, so that like the cookie's only good for 3 weeks or something. A period. So as a third argument, we can pass in an expiration date, like how long the cookie's going to last for. And that's basically it for keeping some data around to persist between the pages on the site. That way we don't have to keep reloading in the same data or keep getting the same data from the user the whole time they're on our site, just switching page to page. So a quick summary: a session is on the server, and we start the session so it starts fresh every time. And a cookie is on the client, so the end user has the ability to delete or remove it, or block cookies altogether. So you have to be careful with that if you're going to start working with cookies. When to store stuff as cookies, but they can be very useful, and there's really not much to it. I was quite surprised when I first saw this textbook and noticed they had an entire chapter on sessions and cookies. Anybody have any questions about that? We will see it in our example. Yeah, today's going to be mostly an example day because I put together some talking notes, but on the next talking notes, I put the label at the top of the page, and I think I stared at it for 3 days trying to figure out what I was going to say. It's like, I think everybody's familiar with logging into sites, right? Enter your username and password to do something on a web page. We've all probably experienced that a time or two this morning already, just like every day. But so it took me a long time just to come up with something to say. Is it okay if I erase all this? So short notes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, there's really not much to it. A cookie is a string stored on the client machine.
Before you erase that right there by cookies, does it say persistent data across our script? Or
Yes.
What's that script? Okay. All right. Thanks.
Across our scripts.
Okay.
So we have this after we say session start. So like on the home page, we put session start and loaded in something to the session array called name. Then when we get over to the receipt, as long as it says session start at the beginning of that script, we can access that index name from the session bank. So this array continues page to page on our site, as long as every page it passes through has session start there.
And then with
Or-
the cookie, we just
Yeah.
do that cookie and then use that index in the parentheses instead of the variable name. We'll use, that's why we're using the indexes, because of what's in that set in right there.
Yeah, it's an associative array.
Okay.
So we have whatever word we put there to index the thing. Just for the generic one on the board, I'd put index. Actually, we could pass through some scripts that don't use any session data and leave that off. So I should say that as it's, once we start a session, as long as we haven't hit that thing I just erased, as long as we haven't hit the function session destroy, we can still access that array.
Okay.
So this creates the array. Yeah, you can think of it that way. This function just creates the array, and session destroy deletes that array. So anytime, no matter how many scripts we pass through between those two functions, we have access to that array. And then we don't have to keep asking the user for the same data over and over again on every page of the site, like we did with the email stuff the other day. So next up is secure logins. It's fairly straightforward. It's well-known fact that computers are great at keeping track of things, right? That's why we have found so many useful uses for them, because computers keep track of things. In particular, any particular individual's records can be organized and retrieved independently of anyone else's individual records. And all we need is a way to identify which of the individual's account records should be the ones that get retrieved. And that's what logins are for. So the basic idea, I think everybody's familiar with it. Every user is given a unique identifier. So a number, a name, and let them use their own email, I guess, is very common. I'll write those on here. It's like a number, a name. I'll just put ... etc. Anything that can uniquely identify that particular user. Every user gets one of those. And when a user goes to access the software, they just enter the input, then the user inputs this identifier to access their account. All of that should seem almost trivial, right? I think everybody's familiar with that. And that way, that user only sees their own records. They don't have to dig through all the files that are available to find their own stuff. It's already organized based off that unique identifier they have. However, a significant bit of information, like that case I just pointed out, where everybody has access to the same hard drive and have to dig through and find their own files, a significant number or significant quantity of data is what we would consider confidential or private, right? Things that we don't want just anybody seeing. So to keep things confidential and private, or there's a handful of words that go along with that. the standard has become for the unique identifiers to be accompanied with a secret. So I'll put for confidentiality. For confidentiality, the unique ID is often accompanied by a secret. So a unique identifier and a secret to just confirm that a level of confirmation, right? Like, not even necessarily a computer thing. I guess Hollywood likes to spoof it from like the 1920s, the speakeasies or whatever. There's always a secret word you have to know to get in the door. A traditional thing, it's just the computer version of it. Let's see. I should put these in some sort of order. So like a pass key or a pass code. Password is probably about the most common. That's what we're going to look at in our example. Pass key would be like an RFID tag. All right. Got my keys on me? Yeah. Like, I think most vehicles have this anymore, right? So in my Jeep, in order to start it, I have to have this key that has the RFID thing on it. But if I lock my keys inside, in my wallet, I have a key without the RFID thing. So I don't have to be very secure with that because all it'll do is unlock the doors. I can't actually start my Jeep with it. I believe that's fairly standard anymore. But like a pass key to get in, something, the Jeep will only start if this key is within 5 feet of the steering column. So if this key is like in my pocket, I can start the Jeep with the other key, but it has to be right there in that range. Just a low level confirmation, something you actually hold. Sometimes they'll put them on USB drives or something. You have to plug a certain USB drive into a computer before you can enter your password on an account for an extra level of security. And passcode's like a PIN number, right? Just a 4-digit number. It's not very secure. 4-digit number would only get us up to 10,000 different versions, and there's way more than 10,000 people that have PIN codes. So a lot of people are going to have the same PIN number. It's not very secure. Password's a little more secure. Passphrase. Passphrases where we build up a long sentence, lots of words put together into a sentence. Makes it a lot harder to figure out what that is, and a little more secure. Key pairing. We saw that with the AWS sites, right? We got there's public and private keys, and we kept one of them, Amazon kept the other one, and whenever we go to log in, it checks to make sure that those keys are, the key we have is the one that goes with the one they kept. So those pairs have to go together. And then this way only the correct combination of identifier and secret can be used to access the data, the records. Yeah, for us here in class, we're just gonna go with passwords in our example. The account identifier and secret will just be fields in the database. So the chapter had a number of things about adding extra security in the PHP going into the PHP config files and changing words. Config files are very straightforward to work with. It's always a text file. So you just go in there, find the line that needs a different word in it, and change that word. I was just, for our example, I was just going to put it in the database, put the fields in the database, and encrypt the password in the database using the built-in database encryption, and use that to line them up. Because it's not a security class. Yeah, this is a PHP class, so we just need to see how PHP and MySQL work together is our goal here. And in a specific security class, then you would get a lot more into all of that, configuring your PHP for the secure entry. We'll just use the built-in stuff with the database. What else I have? Yeah, and we don't want it to be readily available, so we're not just going to throw that string in our database. We're going to encrypt it. But the database comes with several layers of encryption we'll look at, I guess, now. Before we might as well look at that now, well, since I just mentioned it. To see the ones available, I'll go ahead and share my screen. And open Google. There are several ways to do this. I'm going to search encryption and hashing in Mariadb. Remember, we were using the Mariadb flavor of MySQL, so we want to look for that explicitly. And then they have this page that shows all the built-in ones that we use when we do insert and select queries to encrypt and decrypt data. So the most basic one is going to be password. Password encrypts it, and there's not a built-in decryption to go with the password. So we'd have, if we use the password function, we'd have to use send the new password to the database and have the database check it using that same function. There's some different things here to check sums, press it, encoding and decoding things. This right here, DES encrypt and DES decrypt, is probably the most secure one. This one right here, AES encrypt and AES decrypt, that's what I'm going to recommend using, just at least to start off with here. Stands for something encryption standard. It probably says on this page. Oh, yes. Advanced encryption standard, so it's a good secure one, uses a 128-bit key. And whenever we go to pass in our data, looks like a mess here, so I'm just going to write on the board. Oh, I guess it was right there at the top. Whenever we go to pass in our data, we put in the word we want to encrypt, the string we want to encrypt. So in our case, what was entered in the password field on the create account form, when we see that here in a few minutes. We'll just grab that value from that field and encrypt it. And then we need a second string that we use to encrypt it. We'll pass in a second string that the computer will go through this big complicated algorithm, turn that into a number, and then use that to jumble the letters around. And then when we go to decrypt it, we do this in the select query. So it'd be like select AES decrypt, and then we'd want to decrypt what's in the password field, wherever we stored it, and then we pass in the same string that we used to encrypt it in order to decrypt it. Because again, that algorithm will turn that other string into a number and then use it to walk backwards through the algorithm to get back to the original string. So the AES encrypt goes in the insert query, and the AES decrypt goes in the select query, and then we get back to that And we can add other levels of security. A very common thing is called salting. I'll go ahead and write that on the board. That's one that is often done in PHP. I don't need much room for it. So just from the word, salting a password. Salting, if we think about that like food, that's flavor for our food, right? We have like maybe a pork chop sitting on a plate, and we grab the salt container and shake a bunch of salt on top of it. And it's flavor that we actually put on top of our food for when we eat it. And kind of same thing for a password. We put extra characters I can spell the word character correct. We put extra characters in the string before encrypting it. So, for example, let's say in a password box, the user's password is an easy one. I'll do that really bad example. P at $$. So their password is just Pat, kind of in that room there. Then in our PHP script, we would add some stuff to that. So over in our PHP, we'll grab that and put it in like a variable called pass. And then we'll add stuff to, I'm just going to write post and abbreviate it. So we'll grab that from the field, post it in this variable, and then before we send it to the database, we add some stuff to it. So like put SDEV at the front of it, then that password they entered, and then 253 at the end of it, and then we encrypt that. Just to make it a little bit harder for somebody to break it on the other side. Because what is actually encrypted and stored in the database is not the same thing the user entered. Nor is it the same thing that that we're going to be checking when the user enters a new one, or unless we add those words back to it. But we added some stuff to it. Like we put flavoring onto that password before encrypting it to make it a little bit harder to figure out what it originally was.
How can a user tell if that's encrypted, if their information is encrypted? Is it from in the web, in the browser thing where it has the little lock button or the little lock? How can you tell?
That is a secure. That is the site is secure. You have a secure connection. So for that means there's a digital certificate attached to the website. An outside authority confirmed that site is who they claim they are. Yeah, from the user's perspective, there's not an easy way to tell about if your data is encrypted or not. In our modern world, you should probably just go ahead and assume that it is, because it probably is, and if it isn't already, somebody's working on encrypting it. But there's not really a quick, easy way for the user to tell.
Okay, so it's more so if you have a database with PII or anything like that with patients, whether they know or not, it's just mostly the responsibility of the security or the coder to make sure that that's encrypted so that there's no.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yes. So like if you're thinking about medical records, your medical records are definitely encrypted. Anything like that. So in most cases it is anymore, and yeah, you said there at the end, it's the responsibility of the coder or the security expert at the firm, because any more and more that's been separated. The coders have enough to do, so usually there's a security professional working with the coder. Right? After all the scripts wrote, the security professional goes through it and adds this, checks or adds in more security afterwards.
They add the little salt and the flavor.
Yeah, yeah, but that is something we do. Salting is something we do in the script. And then if they don't know what that, if somebody wants to try to figure out what that password is, it kind of has to run back through our script in order to figure out what that salt is. They also have to know how our script salted it. So that's a very common thing to do, and it's really easy in PHP. And also, we can do that with the key, right? For that AES encryption method. So we're going to pass in this string and a key that we use to encrypt it. We can also salt the key so that somebody can't really even tell how make it that much harder to tell how the data was encrypted to begin with. For our purposes here, just learning the concepts, I'm going to use the same key to encrypt it and decrypt it and not really bother with any security on that. I'm just going to pick a string when we get there and use that one to write stuff and pull it back, and that'll be fine for the assignment still, because this is not a security class. We just need to see the basic, know some basic ideas of it. But security is a large field in and of itself. So worked in with all our other material, there's not a whole lot of time to study security at any decent level of details. Just quickly mention it, make sure you're aware of it, and that it's important for us to do, because some information is, well, some things are just generally considered private information, but some information is protected by law, right? So if you failed to encrypt somebody's medical records, that's something that falls under legal ramifications. So you have to watch out for things like that. And the last note I have here is I also may put in the instructions for the assignment, something to be careful about. An easy mistake to make is allowing any valid username to work with any valid password. Right? So where we have two users, say Sally and Bob. That's the test users we have in our database right now. An easy mistake to make would be to allow Sally's username to work with Bob's password, or Bob's username to work with Sally's password, and mix and match the usernames. So like Sally could get in whether she entered her own password or whether she entered Bob's password. It's a really easy mistake to make. There's lots of different ways that can happen, which means there's also lots of ways to avoid that. So make sure you check for that when you're debugging your thing. That is one of the things I'm going to do when I grade it, is I will make up 2 new users for your database and then see if user 1 can get in with user 2's password. It was one of the things I will be checking whenever I grade these assignments. But there are a number of ways for it to happen, and a number of ways to avoid it. That was the lecture notes, the talking notes I had about this stuff. It should be fairly straightforward because, well, we deal with passwords every day, right? It's not it wasn't a secure login, but right whenever you all showed up here in the Zoom call today, I saw your name pop up. So you did log in. Zoom knew who it was. I don't know if it was secure. My login had to be secure because I set up this meeting several months ago, back in February, I think. I scheduled this meeting, so I had to go through the whole secure login to confirm that it is me in order to start the meeting. I don't think you all had to do secure logins, but it is definitely logged in because all our names were already there. Nobody changed their name when they came in today that I noticed. So it's something we are all well aware of. And then, yeah, like I said earlier, when I first saw this textbook, I was surprised that the author managed to get an entire chapter out of sessions and cookies. There's not much to that. Anybody have any questions about that stuff before we look at an example and start actually applying that concept? Make some set up the login for our example site, which is going to be very, 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 very similar to the login for the weekly programming assignment.
No.
Okay, yeah, I was just getting ready to say, assume the silence means no questions proposed. So we'll go ahead and jump on here, get started. I'll make sure Jamp's running. Oh, by the way, I did finally get around to checking Jamp on my Chromebook test, and it runs fine on Chromebook. I didn't have the panel, I didn't have the interface, so I had to do all this right from the Linux command line. But yeah, for Chromebook users, it still loads in and works the same. You just have to hit this. You have to start it from the command Linux, from the bash shell. I couldn't find where that interface was to. It's probably on there somewhere, and I just couldn't find it in the folders. But I didn't really dig that hard. But all of that localhost testing server we've been using does work fine on a Chromebook. I did finally get around to testing that. Let's see, I'll use the keyboard shortcuts again, because that's really useful to be able to keep our fingers on the keyboard most of the time. So remember, Windows E, as in everything, opens our file explorer, and then the things we do most often, like start software or navigate between folders or navigate to different directories, those are shortcutted. So we can do it kind of like we would in command prompt, only we don't have to put in that first instruction to say what function we want. The computer will figure out which one we want. So like always, we can hit Alt-D, as in Delta, to get to the address bar on anything that has an address bar, and navigate to the folder we need. So in the C drive, there's a Jamp folder, there's htdocs folder, and I'll just go part of the way there. And then in the My Pages folder, we can do this one level at a time. I'll be going to the SDEV 253 folder, and I'll go ahead and go to the next one. There's a folder in there called Class, and then we can, here's all our class examples. And right when we get in the folder, I just hit the arrow key and started scrolling down. So I'm scroll down to the most recent example there. And then the regular Control-C and Control-V to copy and paste works. And if you hit F2, the function keys up at the top of the keyboard, F2 will allow you to rename it. So where are we at now? Module 6, the blue, I guess it's -A again. Maybe the only example this week.
I'm sorry, what did you have to do? You just had your cursor over top of the file and then pressed F2?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
make sure whatever highlight one of the files, scroll up and down to get to the one you want, and then F2. And if you're a lot of keyboards anymore, you might have to hit a function key to do that. They're inconsistent. You might have to hit the function key, or it might be the one that your keyboard might do it without the function key. But however you get to the F2 function key, we'll rename it. And then instead of typing the address, we can always scroll to it and hit enter to get to the files as well. Let's see. So on our site, thus far, we put the home page as the index. Remember, index is a special name. So whenever a browser goes to the website or the really, that means the folder holding all the files for the website, it's going to look for a file called index and open that. And I think it was the week 4 assignment where we had the PHP version and from updated old versions. And remember, several people had both an index.html and an index.php file. So perhaps you've noticed at that time that the index.php will get precedence over the index.html. So the .php, if there's one of each, the PHP one will be open first. But it's a much better form to have only one index file. So with our adjustments today, this new secure login stuff, whenever somebody goes to the site, we don't want them to go right to the home page. We want them to go to a login page and tell us who they are before they get to the home page. So I'm going to change the name of this again. So once again, F2, and I'm just going to rename this as home.html. And that means our links go to the wrong page now, right? So before I forget anything, I'm going to go in and fix that. And we didn't do it the other day. The other day we only opened stuff. So to create a new file, I'll go ahead and create the new index file. And to create the new file, we can just type it in there. So like start Notepad++, because our start and change directory functions are implied. So the first argument is, what do we want to start? And then we just pass in the files we want to start. So I want to open that with index.html, and we'll build a login form. And we can pass several in. I think I need quote marks to pass several in. If I don't need quote marks, it won't hurt to have it there. So in quote marks, I'm going to put index.html, which should be a new one. Then home.html, so I can change those links. A space. Apology.html. Space. Order.html. Actually, I'm just going to open the one file. I'm going to do index.html. Instead of thinking about it beforehand, I'm going to go back in and open them afterwards. So to create a new file, just put the name there, even if it doesn't exist. This is the part I actually wanted to show anyway. When you hit enter, what? I don't know why it just opened Bing. Open Notepad++ with index.html. Okay, I don't know why it went to this, tried to search for something there. Yeah, and if it doesn't know what you want, it'll try to search for it automatically. Might as well point out that feature. So if the file doesn't exist, you get this little message. It doesn't exist. Do you want to create it? You can just hit yes. And now that file does exist. So first thing, it's good to be systematic. And as soon as we know something's going to need to happen, we want to go ahead and deal with it. So I'm going to open a few things. I think I can open more than one this way. So home, and order. The review page will have that. And the confirm page will have a link too, right? Yeah. So I'm going to open everything that has the links in them and go ahead and change that beforehand. And we could have done this all from the address bar, just type in that whole list. If you put spaces in the names of your files, that starts to be a problem because things are space delimited, but it's not too big of a deal to work around it. Yeah, so now our index, I'm just going to double click that word and rename it home. and then copy that to that same link on every page. Or if you use one of those other methods like Ajax or object-oriented PHP, you just have to change it once. But copy and paste isn't that bad. And then we need some of this stuff. That way all our links still work. And yeah, you always want to do that. As soon as you realize it needs to happen, go ahead and do it. Otherwise, it's really easy to forget about it. So our login page, now we're ready to make that login page. I'll just copy everything from this. So Control A to select it, Control C to copy, and then Control Tab, and still holding the Control but key down so I can scroll to that index page, that new index page, and paste all that. So we don't need all this. We're going to make a login form, so we don't need a login. We don't need all this stuff, right? That apology, we definitely don't need that. Do we need the nav bar for a login page? I don't think we do it, right? Because we want somebody to log in before they can get to the rest of the site. So I'm take that out of there. And in this case, our title up at the top isn't anything fancy. So I'm just going to put that on the form and go ahead and get rid of that normal one there. That'll be enough to make.
Okay, so if we're using the object-oriented version of this thing, a lot of the stuff that our object-oriented thing would have, we don't want.
Yeah, so you'd probably do that as a new HTML file, because we don't necessarily need any scripting on the login page either. Right? All we're going to do is putting usually two input boxes. Two input boxes, one for the username, one for the password, and usually a link to go to a page to create a new account if they don't already have one. So we don't necessarily need any server-side scripting here. When I worked through the programming assignments, doing my practice run at that, I was still using the object-oriented version, and I just threw a new index.html on the front and renamed that object version home. And then there's an index page that just had a login form at the beginning. Does that answer your question, Joe?
Sorry. I guess so. Yeah, sorry. I'm having trouble with my mute button.
Oh, okay. Yeah, our situation's kind of changed because just because we have that definition of what a page on the site is supposed to be, that doesn't mean we have to use that every time, right? We can do other stuff.
So we still use our style sheet because we still want it to kind of look like it, but it won't have all the other junk in it.
Yeah, because we definitely don't want them to get to the nav bar yet. If you had a big fancy header on your site, like your site has a big fancy header, you probably want to keep that in, right? Where the bike animation, you have animated images and stuff in your header.
Okay.
You probably want that on the login page.
But then after that, it would be a blank page.
Yes.
Yeah, because for my site, I had to go with the old HTML because I could not, for some reason, I could not get the object-oriented stuff to load in properly. I loaded the file in and rather than spend 3 days trying to figure it out, I said, well, I'll go to plan B.
That works. Yeah, there's more than one way to do it. That's the most important part, is that there are multiple ways to do it. So that there is a plan B when something doesn't work. Or often with programming, plan C and plan D and plan E before we finally get something up and running efficiently. But
yeah, the folder for that I'm pulling out of is called Plan B.
Oh, yeah, sometimes it takes a couple tries. But yeah, so first thing I did is rename the home page because we don't want our browser to go there immediately when we go to a login page. And using the lots of different HTML pages, that's just a quick copy and paste on that one word. And that way I know it gets done everywhere and it's out of my mind, so I don't have to think about it again. And changed it and then used the save all button to make sure they all got saved. So for now, the rest of those pages should be the same. We don't need to get back to those for a minute until we get logged in. And a login form, we know how to make those, right? We're going to need a form, and the user's going to enter some data, and we're going to submit it to the server to make sure it's the right data. So we'll need to, here we probably want to post it, right? We definitely don't want to send the password with get, where it can be read in the address bar before it even gets to the database where we encrypt it and stuff. So using post to send that. And at some point, I'm going to make a script called login.php and just doing things in order. I know I need that, so I'm going to hit new file and kind of mark it up. Nothing fancy here. I'm going to echo login script coming soon. That way I don't get an error for it not being there or anything. And this will be login.php, and we'll get around to what we do there in a few moments. So back over to the form. So there's a couple things we need here. Really just two boxes where when we set up the database, I went with emails. That's fairly common anymore. It seems like we use the email to log in more than we have make up a unique name and then tell us what your email is. So just go ahead and use the email to log in. So we need a place for people to put that. Input type equals email. Name equals email. And that's probably good for here. An ID equals email can also be useful. And maybe a label. That way they know what to put there. A label out front or a placeholder. I tend to use placeholders more often anymore myself, but I just started doing that because it seemed like I was seeing that more and more often. Instead of a label next to the form, there would just be that grayed out, that light gray text in the form saying what is supposed to go there. But that's the placeholder attribute. We've all seen HTML before. And then we also need a place for them to enter a password. So input, and again, we have a type equals password. And in this case, I think that'll work fine for our name as well. And an ID if you wanted to do some form validation. I was going to skip the form validation here. Because typically we would do that in JavaScript, not in before we send it to the server, not on the server after we send it, where we have to send the messages back. Then a couple buttons are really just one button, right? Input type equals submit. Value equals login. And for something like this, I typically leave off the reset button. There's only two fields, right? If there's 10 or 20 fields, then it can be quite an ordeal to go back and clear them out. But if the only two fields on the form are the username and the password, it's really not much trouble to clear them out. So I usually just leave off the reset button, and that way there's only one button that says login. But however you want to put it, I'm just going to put the one button for now. And we can give this a check. But we probably need to style it up a little first, right? So now I need to open Google Chrome. And there's a couple ways. So I could hit Windows Tab, scroll back over here, and open Chrome from the address bar in the Explorer. I think I'll do that. There's also shortcut keys. I keep it pinned to my taskbar, and it's the 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th thing over. So on my computer, I could hit Windows 5, Windows and the number 5 key, and that would open Chrome. I'm just going to go back over here and type it in the task in the Explorer. That's the one we've been looking at for keyboard shortcuts the other day and then again today. Chrome, and then we can tell Chrome where to go. So open Chrome and go to localhost/mypages. And if you put spaces in your name, make sure you use quote marks. Open Chrome and go to localhost/mypages/ SDEV_253 /class/mod6 blue-a. So if you have spaces in your name, make sure you have quote marks. But if you avoid spaces, you can just type that in all at once. When you hit enter, it should open up for us. If I type that address in wrong or correctly. Oh, the title looks good. Okay, there we go. So everything showed up, but that's probably not what we want the form to look like, right? Maybe, where's my little pen? Whenever I think of login form, I think of something in the middle of the screen with our boxes and our login button and a link. I can write it here, LIN. Okay. A link to go to another form to create an account in case they don't have a username and password yet. So we just need to do a little bit of styling on it to make that look a little bit better. But yeah, whenever I think of a login form, I think of something more like that, not up there in the top left corner. So hit Windows Tab and scroll right back over to Notepad++ and hit, I think, Control N. Yeah, Control N to create a new file or create page, just to get that link in there. I'll just put a comment here. Create account. And we'll make that form in a moment. Save that as create account.html. Most of this is stuff we've seen before, right? I hit Control S to save it, the normal thing. And a page to create the account so that if they can't log in yet, we'll go over to another form and let them log in. Anything else I need on here? Oh, we should probably put the name of like some sort of header, right? But there wasn't much of a header on this page, but put a name somewhere on there so they can tell what they're logging into. All of that should seem straightforward, right? Or somewhat obvious, right? If they don't have an account, we need to give them a way to get to an account. So we'll make that page here in a moment. And just put a link there at the bottom of the form right below the login button. And then just a big label to tell what site they're on. So hit Windows tab again, go over to the browser, and reload the page, which F5 reloads a page. This is the quick way. Another quick way to reload the page is hit Alt-D to get to the address bar and just hit enter. And the computer will re-navigate to the page it's on, which effectively just loads it the same way. So the link there kind of matched the style of the page already, but now we need to do some style sheet stuff. Control O will get your open file dialog box so we can get right back to the style sheet. And somewhere there was a way to submit buttons. Oh yeah. So here's the way the buttons looked on the site. So I guess I need to add that class over here to that input button. I think it was here, class equal button. Bunch of things we've seen before, right? If we hit Alt-D and just reload the page, we'll get that. That works, but it still doesn't quite look like a form, right? So somewhere in the style sheet, I'll come down to the bottom and make some style rules for a class called login. And add that to the form, but all that stuff we've seen before. So let's say with probably like 35% of the page, border 4 pixels, double, and one of the colors. One of the colors I already used on the page. And then we can probably center the content. Margin left, set to auto. Margin right, set to auto. That way they'll be the same size. Margin top. I'll just pick a number to come down a little bit. And get that more like the middle of the page. Windows tab and scroll back over the browser. And Alt-D and enter is a really easy way to reload the page. Oh, it's loading from the cache though. So if we hit F12 to get the inspector panel, we can do a hard reload. I was gonna bring this up. Whenever we hold the button, do the long click there, and we get those other options. You see Control-Shift-R is the hard reload. So we hit Control-Shift-R, it should look back at the style sheet now. There we go. Guess that kind of works. I'm gonna hit F12 to toggle those back off. Maybe just some padding, and then that'll probably be good. So we already know how to style stuff, right? Padding 1.3 elements. I just put a little bit of padding on there, and F5 is the standard reload, or Control R also reloads. Control Shift R does a hard reload so that it forces it to look back at the style sheet. That'll work for now. Could probably go on for a while with the CSS and make a really, really nice looking login box, but that's not what we're looking for today. We just need a login box. So now, before anybody can get to the homepage, they have to tell us who they are and their password. And for test data, use easy passwords. We will see it here before too long that Google's going to give us a warning about easy passwords, and then hit the login button. And right now, okay, yeah, so here's the warning. So when I set up the test data, I gave everybody the same name and password. So like Sally's password was also Sally. And what this message box refers to is Google has a list of every known data breach that's ever happened. And when you enter a password, it checks that password against the list of known breaches. And then they took that a step further. And the reason we're probably seeing it here is because the name was Sally. They also set up some algorithms to try to brute force guess that password. And if they can guess that password in about the time that it takes to load a page, they'll show you this message. So for your test users, where you have easy passwords in order to make testing easy, you're probably going to see that every time because you're going to use passwords like Sally, which a computer will check every possible character and guess that in under a second if there's only 5 characters. So you can either use really secure passwords or just ignore this message while testing because your users will use secure passwords afterwards. I chose to just ignore it. So that little box is gonna pop up a lot for us today. So if it's a really easy password to guess and Google's algorithms can guess your password in a couple seconds, which is what probably happens with simple test data that doesn't make it really, really hard to debug your script, you'll see that message. Or if it's on the list of known data breaches, you will see that message as well. But it's probably going to show up while testing stuff. So I just ignored it. You could also use a really strong password. So I did a passphrase this time, big long passphrase. So when I hit login, I don't get the message this time. Using a huge passphrase, you also how long that thing I typed in was, Google couldn't guess it in the amount of time that it took to load a page. So it didn't see that message. So that gets our form set up. We're ready to log in, but before we do that, we probably want to make this other page, right? And set up some accounts for the user to use. But it looks like it's about 2:20, so probably a good time to take a 10-minute break first, right? Does anybody have any questions about that stuff so far? Everything so far is kind of HTML, right? Stuff we already know, we just had to do it had to work it into the example. Give the user a place to enter their username and password, and then get the other files ready as we need them. Okay, so if nobody has any questions, why don't we go ahead and take a 2-minute break, and then we'll continue on with this example afterwards. We'll stop the screen share, and it is 2:21, so we'll get started back at 2:31. And after an hour of talking, I'm kind of thirsty. I'm ready for a cup of coffee.